May 27th, 1997.
On May 27, 1997, one of the most devastating tornadoes in United States.
An ordinary Tuesday in Central Texas, and the last afternoon that 27 people would ever see. In less than 3 minutes, a tornado would erase a neighborhood so completely that first responders would drive past it without recognizing where the houses used to stand. It would scour the fields 18 inches deep, strip the bark from trees, peel asphalt off the roads. It would rewrite what meteorologists thought was possible. Nobody saw it coming the way it came. The atmosphere that morning was loaded, yes, but not in the shape of a classic tornado day. Something else was at work. Something wrong.
25 years ago tomorrow, an F5 tornado, the biggest one recorded in Texas.
But that was only the beginning. To understand how Jarrell happened, we need to go back. Before the first warning, before the first radar signature, before a single siren sounded.
Told us this week, even after you put those pictures away, even after you move to another state.
Central Texas isn't supposed to get tornadoes like this. Not in this part of the state. The Blackland prairies roll between Waco and Austin. Pasture land broken by creeks and juniper, long horizons of grass and sky. Tornadoes happen here. They happen everywhere on the plains. But the monsters, the killers, tend to stay north. In March of 1925, the tri-state tornado had torn across Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana, killing 695 people in the single deadliest twister in American history. In May of 1953, a different F5 had slammed into Waco, only 90 miles up the road from Jarrell, and killed 114 people downtown. And in August of 1990, an F5 had hit Plainfield, Illinois, killing 29 in a single afternoon. Those storms were the benchmarks, the measuring sticks people used when they talked about a bad one.
Anniversary for the people of Jarrell, Texas. On May 27, 1997.
Since records began in 1950, no F5 or F4 tornado had ever been documented in either Williamson or Travis County. 47 years of data. The sky had not produced one. The setup on the morning of May 27, 1997, did not look like a day that would change that. An upper-level low sat far to the north, over Nebraska. Wind shear over central Texas was weak, around 30 knots at mid-levels, almost nothing near the ground. By the textbook, this wasn't a classic supercell environment. The Storm Prediction Center had flagged a moderate risk of severe weather, but most of the concern was for large hail and straight-line winds. Strong tornadoes weren't really in the forecast.
Struck that Williamson County town. 27 people were killed.
What was in place was instability. Surface dew points near 73 degrees, temperatures climbing toward 90, Cape values, the raw fuel of a thunderstorm, running at levels meteorologists rarely see, and drifting quietly southward through the atmosphere that morning, invisible to almost every human eye, was a gravity wave, a ripple of pressure radiating out of a dying storm complex hundreds of miles north. The wave was on course to meet a slow-moving cold front just west of Waco. You can support us by liking, subscribing, and telling us which country you are watching from. The atmosphere had other plans.
We interviewed former KVUE meteorologist Troy Kimball about that day.
The morning in Jarrell started like any other Tuesday in late May. The mercury hit 79 before sunrise. The air was thick enough that lifelong Texans were complaining by breakfast. Kids were in their last weeks of school, counting down to summer. Double Creek Estates, a small subdivision of 38 single-family homes, and a few mobile homes tucked against the northwest edge of town, was mostly quiet. Larry and Joan Ego were at work. Keith Mooring was home with his 2 sons, Eric and Ryan. His wife, Cynthia, who ran a cleaning business in town, would later rush back to be with them when the sky started to turn. The Smith family lived a few doors down. 2 teenage brothers named Ruiz lived next door to the Moorings in a mobile home. 38 houses, 131 people. There was no reason to think anything was wrong. It was hot, it was muggy, it was Texas in May. The afternoon forecast mentioned storms. Nobody read it twice, but the atmosphere was already loading, and no one in that subdivision could see what was coming. 12:54 p.m. The National Weather Service issued a tornado watch for portions of East Texas and western Louisiana. It was a routine box on a routine spring day. In Jarrell, nobody stopped what they were doing. Around noon, thunderstorms began firing near Waco, right at the intersection of the cold front and that slow-moving gravity wave. At 1:21 p.m., the first tornado of the day dropped out of the clouds in McLennan County, 50 miles to the north. Warnings began to stack up on the radar printout. Forecasters at the Austin/San Antonio office watched a line of cells backbuild southwestward down the Interstate 35 corridor, a direction tornadoes weren't supposed to travel. Cells weren't supposed to propagate against the prevailing flow. But they were. By 3 p.m., a massive supercell was organizing near the tiny community of Prairie Dell, about 8 miles north of Jarrell. On radar, it was a blob of green and red with only a faint hook. The rotation was there, but it wasn't textbook. A meteorologist who studied the storm for decades afterward said simply that the Jarrell supercell was not behaving the way the rulebook said supercells behave. 3:25 p.m. The first funnel from the Prairie Dell storm reached the ground. It was thin, rope-like, dancing across the fields. It grew fast, rated F2, wandered for about 8 minutes, and dissipated. A second tornado dropped moments later, multi-vortex, brief, gone in 4 minutes. The storm was cycling, trying to build something bigger. At Jarrell Farm Supply on the edge of town, a man named Scott Beckwith stepped outside with a camera. He aimed it at the sky. The tornado in front of him was still forming. Multiple vortices were twisting around a central column, like the limbs of some enormous figure walking across the prairie. The photo Beckwith took, in the next few seconds, would later be known as the Dead Man Walking, one of the most recognizable tornado images ever captured. 3:30 p.m. The Austin/San Antonio office issued a tornado warning for Williamson County, effective until 4:30 p.m. The warning noted the storm was located about 5 miles west of Jarrell, moving southeast at 10 miles per hour. 10 miles per hour. Most tornadoes race along at 30, 40, sometimes 60. This one was crawling. That single fact, its slowness, was about to become the deadliest detail of the day. 3:40 p.m. The tornado that would go down in history touched down just northwest of Jarrell, inside the Williamson County line. It started as a slim, rope-like funnel against the green-black underbelly of the supercell. Within a minute, it was widening. Within 2 minutes, it was a wedge. By the time it crossed County Road 305 and began grinding south-southwest toward Double Creek Estates, it had swollen to 3/4 of a mile across, nearly the size of the subdivision it was aiming at. Inside the houses, the sirens had been going for minutes. Some families had already left, piling into cars and driving away. Others had gathered in interior bathrooms, center hallways, any room without windows. Keith and Cynthia Mooring pulled Eric and Ryan into the bathroom. The Ruiz brothers, from next door, had run over to shelter with the Moorings. The frame house seemed safer than a trailer. Their mother, Maria, was driving home from town to be with them. Larry and Joan Ego had just pulled into their driveway with their 3 sons. They herded the boys inside and moved to the middle of the house. Billy and Debbie LaFrance sprinted to the bathtub at the first scream of the siren. The sky above them turned dark green, then the color of a bruise. Rain came in sideways sheets. Hail pounded the roofs. The pressure dropped so fast that ears popped. Somewhere in a yard, a wind chime rang once and fell silent. 3:45 p.m. The tornado was almost on top of them. The air had that charged smell, ozone and wet grass and diesel, something metallic underneath. The sound was no longer a freight train. It was deeper than that. A low, grinding roar that made the windows hum in their frames and the floor tremble. The broadcast cut out in some homes. Power flickered and died. Cell phones weren't reaching anyone. 3:48 p.m. The tornado entered Double Creek Estates, and then it did something tornadoes almost never do. It slowed down. For approximately 3 minutes, an eternity in the life of a violent tornado, the vortex sat over the subdivision and ground it into the earth. Wind speeds in the multi-vortex core were later estimated at more than 260 miles per hour, with some engineering studies suggesting peak gusts above 300. The storm wasn't racing across Double Creek. It was processing it. Homes didn't collapse. They came apart. The mooring house, built to code with evenly spaced anchor bolts and sill plates, was no match for the duration of the wind. Roofs peeled away in seconds. Exterior walls failed. Interior walls followed. Then the floor joists, the subfloor, and finally the concrete slab itself. Everything stripped and scattered into pieces too small to identify. Pipes were ripped out from underneath the foundation. In the yard, the topsoil was scoured down 18 inches to the raw subsoil. Trees shredded into splinters, and then into nothing. The asphalt of Double Creek Drive was peeled up off the ground like the foil lid off a food tray. Metal buildings on the edge of town were lifted and folded. A guardrail along County Road 305 was impaled by flying wooden planks. 300 cattle grazing in the adjacent pasture were killed. Many of them were thrown a quarter mile. 3:50 p.m., peak impact. Entire families were gone in seconds. Keith and Cynthia Mooring and their 2 boys died together in the bathroom, where they had done exactly what the safety guidance said to do. The Igo family, 5 of them, parents and 3 sons, died together. The Smith family, 3 members, was lost. The Ruiz brothers, who had made the logical choice to leave their mobile home for a sturdier neighbor's house, died in that house. Their mother, Maria, was killed in her car as she tried to reach them. Her trailer, just down the road, was barely touched. 38 homes erased. 27 lives gone. 3:53 p.m. The tornado lifted. After crossing a stand of cedar trees and weakening rapidly, the funnel rose back into the clouds and was gone. It had been on the ground for 13 minutes and traveled just 5.1 miles. Double Creek Estates no longer existed as a place on the map. It existed as a series of concrete slabs, a few bare foundations, and a field of debris too small to recognize. Within minutes, emergency crews from Jarrell and nearby towns were on the road. Power was out across the subdivision. Cell service was down. Families of residents in Double Creek started calling in from Austin, from Round Rock, from across Texas, and getting nothing. No signal, no answer, no way to know. A first responder named Commander Wiseman would later recall that when he arrived, he almost drove past the neighborhood because there was no neighborhood left to recognize. The search and rescue effort turned into a recovery effort within minutes. The Texas Department of Public Safety, the Texas National Guard, the American Red Cross, volunteer fire departments from across the region. All of them poured into Williamson County. Jarrell High School became a temporary shelter. The Jarrell Volunteer Fire Department set up a temporary morgue. Remains were taken to the Travis County Forensic Center for identification. In many cases, it would take days. At least 6 separate families lost 2 or more members. 3 families were wiped out entirely. One survivor, pulled along in her bathtub, was flung several hundred feet and landed, alive, on a road. She was the exception. Then, Governor George W. Bush flew in the next morning, walked the slabs, and told reporters it was the worst tornado he had ever seen. The Federal Emergency Management Agency declined to provide federal disaster aid, citing the scale of private and state contributions. The community absorbed the refusal and kept building. In the years that followed, dozens of storm shelters, small, smooth, white concrete domes, went up in yards west of Interstate 35, dotted across the landscape like markers. Building codes in Texas tightened. The Fujita scale itself was critiqued in the aftermath for its inability to fully capture what had happened at Double Creek, and that critique helped push the eventual move to the enhanced Fujita scale in 2007. Where the Ego House once stood, a memorial park was built. 27 trees were planted, one for each life lost. The scar on the land has grown over. New houses stand where the old ones were erased. Children grow up in Jarrell who have only heard the story secondhand, who know May 27th only from the grief of older neighbors. But for the families who lost someone, time has not healed the wound. It has only dulled it. "27 people did what they were told to do. They heard the sirens. They went to the interior rooms. They sheltered in bathtubs and hallways and closets. It was not enough. A single storm, moving at the speed of a walking man, did in 3 minutes what the earth itself had spent 100 years arranging. In those minutes, entire families disappeared. A neighborhood was unmade, and the ground itself was rewritten. Some storms leave damage. Jarrell left scars that will never fade.